She heard every word. Every single word. Standing in the hallway outside the private dining room, her hand frozen on the door handle, Naomi Chun listened as 5 drunk men bet $50,000 on whether one of them could make her fall in love. "The target is the new marketing director," the voice said. She recognized it immediately. Julian Krause. The CEO's son. The man who had been flirting with her for 2 weeks. The man she had been starting to actually like. "She's cold," Julian continued. "Professional. Doesn't date anyone at the company. 50 grand says I can have her saying she loves me within 3 months. The other men laughed. "You're insane," someone said. "She barely talks to anyone." "What makes you think you have a shot?" "Because I'm me," Julian replied. "And I've never lost." Naomi stood perfectly still. Her heart was pounding. Her face was burning. Her hands were shaking. And then something shifted. The humiliation faded. The hurt faded. And in their place came something cold and sharp and absolutely focused. These men thought she was a game, a trophy, a challenge to be conquered and discarded. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Naomi took a deep breath. She straightened her spine, and she made a decision that would destroy Julian Krause and everyone sitting at that table. She was going to play along. She was going to let Julian think he was winning. She was going to let him chase her, catch her, fall in love with her. And then she was going to take everything. This is the story of the most satisfying revenge I've ever told. And trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end. But before we dive in, I want you guys to know that we do not interrupt your viewing experience by showing ads during the video. So a subscribe from you will really help us. Please subscribe so that we can continue uploading such stories. Thanks. Let's get into this story. Let me rewind to the beginning. Naomi Chun started at Archer Industries on a Monday in September. She was 31 years old, with an MBA from Stanford and a resume that made HR executives nervous. 10 years of marketing experience. 3 successful company turnarounds, a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely uninterested in office politics. She had taken this job for one reason. Archer Industries was bleeding money, and the board had given her complete control over the marketing division. No interference. No second guessing. Whose results? The salary was excellent. The challenge was irresistible. And the CEO, Richard Archer, had personally recruited her with promises of autonomy and eventual partnership. What she hadn't anticipated was Julian. Julian Krause was Richard's stepson from his 3rd marriage. He was 34 years old, classically handsome, and had never worked a real job in his life. His official title was Vice President of Business Development, but everyone knew that was just a fancy way of saying the boss's son needs something to do. He was charming. He was confident, and from the moment Naomi walked into her first executive meeting, he was interested. "Good morning," he said, sliding into the chair next to hers. "You must be the famous Naomi Chun. I've heard incredible things." Naomi didn't look up from her laptop. "I don't know about famous," she said. "I'm just here to work." "All work and no play," Julian said. "We'll have to fix that." Naomi gave him a polite smile and turned back to her screen. Over the next 2 weeks, Julian was everywhere. He stopped by her office with coffee. He invited her to lunches. She politely declined. He found reasons to be in meetings she attended, asking questions that seemed designed to highlight her expertise. It was flattering, in a way. Naomi wasn't blind. Julian was attractive. It was smooth. And unlike most men who pursued her, he seemed genuinely interested in her work, not just her appearance. But something felt off. It was too easy. Too practiced. Too perfect. Naomi had spent her career reading people. It was part of what made her good at marketing. She could spot a fake smile at 50 paces. She could tell when someone was performing rather than being genuine. And Julian Krause was performing. She just didn't know why. She started paying closer attention. She noticed how Julian's charm turned on and off like a switch. In meetings with senior executives, he was serious, professional, almost meek. But with junior employees, especially women, he was different. Looser, more confident, more predatory. She noticed the way other women in the office reacted to him. Some smiled nervously and looked away. Others avoided him entirely. changing direction when they saw him in the hallway. She noticed the whispers. One afternoon, Naomi found herself in the break room with Marcus, a junior analyst who had been at the company for 3 years. "Can I ask you something?" Naomi said, pouring herself a cup of terrible office coffee. "Of course," Marcus replied. "Julian Cross, what's his deal?" Marcus's face changed. The easy smile disappeared. "Off the record?" "Off their record. He's a predator," Marcus said quietly. "He targets women in the company, charms them, dates them, and then publicly humiliates them when he gets bored. It's a game to him." Naomi kept her expression neutral. "Why hasn't anyone done anything about it?" "Because he's Richard Archer's stepson," Marcus explained. "Anyone who complains gets transferred or let go at Cherry Izuselis. Everyone knows, but no one can prove anything. How many women that I know of? 6, but there are probably more." Naomi nodded slowly. "Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate the honesty." She walked back to her office, her mind racing. So that's what Julian Cross was. A predator with daddy's protection. A man who had built a system for hurting women with 0 consequences. And now she was his latest target. The question was, what was she going to do about it? That question was answered sooner than she expected, until the night of the executive dinner. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown, a reward for the leadership team after a successful product launch. Naomi almost didn't attend. She had work to finish, and corporate socializing wasn't her idea of fun. But Richard had insisted, and she was still new enough to feel like she should make an effort. She arrived late, around 8:30. The private dining room was at the back of the restaurant, through a maze of hallways, and past the kitchen. She was almost at the door when she heard her name. She stopped. The voices were coming from inside the room. Male voices. Laughing. Drunk. "I'm telling you," someone said. "The new marketing director is basically a robot. There's no way you're getting anywhere with her. Watch me." Julian's voice replied. "I've done this a dozen times. Remember Sarah from accounting last year? Remember Victoria from legal? They all thought they were too good for me. They all ended up exactly where I wanted them." Naomi's blood ran cold. "This is different," another voice said. "Naomi Chun is actually smart. She's not some junior employee you can dazzle with fancy dinners. That's what makes it interesting," Julian said. "Anyone can seduce an assistant. This is a challenge. $50,000 says I can make her fall in love with me in 3 months." There was a pause. "Define fall in love," someone said. "She tells me she loves me," Julian clarified. "On T-record in front of witnesses, and then I dump her and we all get to watch her world collapse." Laughter. Clinking glasses. "You're a monster," someone said admiringly. "I'll take that bet." Bet. Naomi stood in the hallway, her hand on the door handle, processing what she had just heard. Her first instinct was to walk in there and confront them, to call Julian out in front of everyone, to make a scene and file an HR complaint and watch them all squirm. But that would be too easy. That would be satisfying for about 5 minutes. And then what? Julian would deny everything. His stepfather would protect him. She'd be the hysterical woman who couldn't take a joke. No. Naomi wanted more than a moment of satisfaction. She wanted devastation. And as she stood in that hallway, a plan began to form. A plan so elegant, so patient, so utterly ruthless that Julian Cross would never see it coming. She took out her phone. She pressed record. And then she pushed open the door, walked into the room, and smiled like she hadn't heard a thing. "Now, pay attention, because this is where it gets good." That night, after the dinner, Naomi went home and made a list. She was analytical by nature. It was what made her good at marketing, breaking down problems into components, identifying leverage points, building strategies that addressed every possible objection. Now she was going to apply those skills to something more personal. At the top of the list, she wrote, "Objectives. Primary. Destroy Julian Cross's career and reputation. Secondary. Provide justice for his previous victims. Tertiary. Establish a deterrent for future predators at this company. Below that, She wrote, "Assets, the recording from tonight. Julian's obvious interest in her. Her own analytical skills. Time. And finally, vulnerabilities. Julian thinks he's smarter than everyone. Julian has never faced consequences. Julian's victims have been isolated, unable to connect. Julian's friends are accomplices, not loyalists. They'll turn on each other to save themselves." Naomi studied the list. The path forward was clear. She couldn't just expose the recording from tonight. It would be damaging, but not devastating. Julian would deny it. His friends would back him up. Richard would protect his stepson, at most. It would be a scandal that blew over in a few weeks. No, she needed more. She needed a pattern. Multiple victims telling the same story. Financial records showing this was an organized scheme, not just drunken banter. And most importantly, she needed Julian vulnerable enough that Richard wouldn't protect him. That meant she had to do something that made her skin crawl. She had to let Julian think he was winning. She had to become his mark. But here's the thing about marks. The best cons work because the mark thinks they're the one in control. They think they're the smart one. They never see the knife coming because they're too busy counting their winnings. Julian Krause had spent years preying on women who didn't see him coming. Now he was going to experience what it felt like from the other side. And he would never see it coming either. The first thing Naomi did was find the other victims. It took 2 weeks of careful investigation. Personnel files she shouldn't have accessed. Late-night emails to women who had left the company under mysterious circumstances. Sarah from accounting was the easiest to find. She had transferred to a different department after her relationship with Julian imploded. But she still worked at Archer Industries. She was timid now, avoided eye contact, jumped when men raised their voices. Naomi invited her to lunch. At first, Sarah didn't want to talk about it. Her hands shook when Naomi mentioned Julian's name. "I can't," Sarah whispered. "That's not possible. His stepfather runs the company. He's untouchable." "Everyone's touchable," Naomi said. She told Sarah about the recording, about the bet, about her plan to compile evidence from multiple victims and present it to the board in a way that Richard couldn't ignore. Sarah started to cry. "You believe me?" "I believe you. No one's ever believed me before." Naomi reached across the table and took her hand. "I need your help, Sarah. Not just your story, although I need that too. I need you to help me find the others. We're stronger together." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Victoria from Liga," she said. "She was before me. She quit about a year ago. I think I might have her personal email somewhere." "That's a start," Naomi said. "That's a good start." Over the next month, Naomi built her network. Victoria was harder to reach. She had left the city, moved to Vermont, started a small business selling handmade candles. She didn't want to think about her time at Archer Industries. She had built a new life. But when Naomi explained what she was doing, Victoria agreed to help. "He told me he loved me," Victoria said during their video call, right before he announced at a company party that it had all been a game, that his friends had bet he couldn't seduce the stuck-up lawyer. They all laughed. She wiped her eyes. "I quit the next day. I couldn't face anyone." "I'm sorry," Naomi said. "That should never have happened." "It's not just me," Victoria replied. "There were others, at least 3, that I know of. We tried to warn each other, but HR always sided with Julian. One woman filed a formal complaint. She was terminated within a month, officially for performance issues. Everyone knew the real reason. "I'm going to end this," Naomi said, "but I need your testimony." Victoria nodded slowly. "Whatever you need." By the end of the second month, Naomi had assembled a coalition. 5 women, 5 stories, all following the same pattern. Julian pursuing them relentlessly. Julian making them feel special, chosen, loved. Julian gathering an audience for the humiliation. Julian publicly dumping them in the cruelest way possible. Julian's friends laughing as the women's careers and reputations were destroyed. It was sickening. It was systematic. It was going to end. But Naomi still needed one more thing. She needed Julian to fall. Really fall. Not his usual performance, not his practiced charm. She needed him genuinely vulnerable, so that when she struck, it would hurt as much as what he had done to all those women. And that meant playing her part perfectly. From that night forward, Naomi became a different person around Julian. Not obviously different. Not suspiciously different. Just slightly more open, slightly more warm, slightly more available. She laughed at his jokes. She accepted his coffee. She let him sit next to her in meetings and didn't immediately find a reason to move. Julian noticed. Of course he did. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. "She's warming up to you," his friend Eric said a week later, during one of their private lunches. "I saw the way she looked at you in the board meeting." "I told you," Julian replied smugly. "They all crack eventually. It just takes patience." He had no idea that Naomi was recording this conversation too. She had planted a small microphone in the conference room where they always met. She had accessed Julian's calendar through a shared system and knew exactly when he was meeting with his little group of betting buddies. Every word, every plan, every disgusting comment about her and about the other women they had targeted. She recorded it all, but she didn't act. Not yet. Because Naomi wasn't just collecting evidence. She was waiting for something specific. She was waiting for Julian to actually fall in love with her, and that, she knew, was only a matter of time. Remember that detail. It's going to matter later. The thing about con artists is that they're vulnerable to the very techniques they use. Julian had built his entire romantic strategy around making women feel special. He listened to them. He remembered details about their lives. He made them feel like they were the only person in the room. It was effective because it was, in essence, a simulation of genuine interest. Naomi decided to give him the real thing. She started asking Julian about himself. Not the surface stuff, the job, the car, the expensive hobbies, the deeper stuff. His childhood. His relationship with his stepfather. His dreams. Ease. Fears. Julian, who had spent years pretending to care about women's inner lives, had never experienced anyone genuinely curious about his. He didn't know how to handle it. At first, he deflected. He gave the charming, practiced answers he always gave, but Naomi pressed gently, persistently, with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. And gradually, Julian started to open up. He told her about his biological father, who had left when Julian was 7. He told her about growing up in a series of his mother's marriages, always the outsider, always the stepson. He told her about the desperate need to prove himself that drove every decision he made. He told her things he had never told anyone. And Naomi listened. Really listened. Not because she cared about him. Not yet. But because she understood that the more he shared, the more vulnerable he became. The more it would hurt when she took it all away. But something unexpected started to happen. This is where most people would have messed up. But not Naomi. As weeks turned into months, Naomi noticed something she hadn't anticipated. Julian was changing. Not dramatically. Not obviously. But in small ways that only someone paying close attention would notice. He started being nicer to his assistant. He stopped making cruel jokes in meetings. He began actually preparing for his business development role instead of just showing up and winging it. One night, over dinner at a restaurant he had chosen specifically because it was quiet rather than flashy, he said something that caught her off guard. "I've never met anyone like you, Naomi." It was the kind of line he had probably used 100 times before. But this time there was something different in his voice. Something uncertain. Something real. "What do you mean?" Naomi asked carefully. "Everyone?" "They'll say," Julian said slowly. "I always know what they want from me. Money, access, status. But you don't seem to want anything. You just want me to be honest with you." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I've been performing my whole life. I don't even know who I am underneath all the masks." Naomi felt something shift in her chest. She ignored it. "Maybe it's time to find out," she said. Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "Will you help me?" Naomi looked at his hand on hers. She looked at his face, opened and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. And she said yes, because that was the plan. But also because, for just a moment, She wondered if the man she was destroying might actually be capable of becoming someone worth saving. She pushed that thought away. Remember, she had heard what he said about her. About Sarah, from accounting. About Victoria, from legal. About all the women he had chewed up and spit out. One moment of vulnerability didn't erase a decade of cruelty. The game continued. But the game was getting complicated, because Julian wasn't the only one starting to feel something. Naomi found herself looking forward to their dinners. She found herself laughing at his jokes. Not because she was performing, but because some of them were actually funny. She found herself thinking about him during the day, wondering what he was doing, what he was thinking. She told herself it was just the role. She had to be convincing. Of course she was going to have some feelings. She was pretending to fall in love for hours every day. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she wondered if she was lying to herself. She started testing him, little tests that he didn't know were tests. She mentioned that a friend was having a hard time, struggling with mental health issues. Julian listened for an hour, then spent the next week checking in on Naomi to make sure her friend was okay. She pretended to be upset about a work conflict. Julian didn't try to fix it or minimize her feelings. He just sat with her elder and told her he was there for whatever she needed. She said something vulnerable about her childhood, about feeling like she was never good enough for her parents. Julian's eyes filled with tears. He told her she was one of the most remarkable people he had ever met. That her parents were wrong. That anyone who couldn't see her brilliance was blind. These didn't feel like performances. But then again, Julian was an expert performer. The best performers made you believe. Naomi kept her guard up. But it was getting harder. She confided in Sarah during one of their weekly check-ins. "I'm starting to wonder if he's actually changing," Naomi admitted. Sarah's expression hardened. "That's exactly what he wants you to think. That's how he gets you. He makes you believe you're different, that he's different with you, that you've unlocked some secret version of him that no one else has seen." She leaned forward. "I thought the same thing." Victoria thought the same thing. "Every single one of us thought we were special." Naomi nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right." "Stay focused," Sarah urged. "Remember why you're doing this. Remember what he did to us, what he's planning to do to you." "I will," Naomi promised. But as she drove home that night, she wondered if staying focused was going to be as easy as she made it sound. By month 2, Julian was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble he had anticipated. Not the fun kind of trouble, where he was in control and the woman was falling for his charm. He was in real trouble. He was falling in love. He didn't recognize it at first. He had never actually been in love before. He had simulated it countless times, performed all the gestures and said all the words, but he had never felt the real thing. Now he understood why people wrote songs about it, why they did crazy things, why they threw away their lives for someone who might not feel the same way. He thought about Naomi constantly. When he wasn't with her, he was thinking about when he would see her next. When he was with her, he never wanted to leave. He started dreading the end of the bet, because the bet required him to make her say she loved him and then humiliate her. That was the whole point. That was what his friends were expecting. That was what he had done a dozen times before. But the thought of hurting Naomi made him physically sick. He tried to talk himself out of it. She was just another woman. The bet was just a game. His friends would mock him mercilessly if he backed out now. But none of those rationalizations worked. Because Julian Krauss, for the first time in his miserable life, had met someone he didn't want to lie to. Too bad she was already lying to him. And that's when things got really interesting. 2.5 months into the bet, Julian made a decision. He went to his friends. "I'm out," he said. "I'm calling off the bet." Derek stared at him. "You're what?" "I'm not doing it. I don't want to hurt her." There was a long silence. Then Derek started laughing. "Oh my God," he said. "You actually fell for her. You fell for the mark." "It's not funny," Julian said. "It's hilarious," Derek replied. "The great Julian Krauss, brought down by a marketing director with a nice smile. Wait until everyone hears about this." Julian's face hardened. "You're not going to tell anyone? Or what?" "You'll fire me. Your stepfather would never allow it." "I'm not going to fire you," Julian said quietly. "But if you say one word about this, I will make your life miserable in ways you can't imagine. I know things about you, Derek. About the expense reports, about the harassment complaint from your assistant that mysteriously disappeared, about the weekend in Vegas that your wife doesn't know about. Derek's smile faded. You wouldn't try me. There was a long, tense moment. Fine, Derek said eventually. Keep your little girlfriend, but you still owe 50 grand. I'll write you a check tomorrow. Julian walked out of the room, his hands shaking. He had done Italiano. He had protected Naomi. He had chosen her over his friends, his pride, everything. Now he just had to tell her the truth about the bet, about his past, about all of it. He had no idea that she had been listening to the entire conversation, because Naomi had never stopped recording, and now she had everything she needed. Stay with me here, because the ending is going to blow your mind. Julian invited Naomi to dinner. A special dinner, he said. He had something important to tell her, something he should have told her a long time ago. Naomi agreed. She knew exactly what he was going to say. She had listened to his conversation with Derek a dozen times. She knew he was going to confess about the bet. She knew he was going to tell her he had fallen in love with her, and she knew what she was going to do in response. But first, she had some preparations to make. Over the past 3 months, Naomi had compiled a comprehensive file on Julian Cross. The recordings from the executive dinner, where he had proposed the bet, the recordings from his meetings with Derek and the others, where they had discussed their previous victims. Testimony from Sarah from accounting, who had agreed to come forward after Naomi tracked her down and explained what she was planning. Testimony from Victoria, from Liga, who had been waiting years for someone to believe her. Testimony from 3 other women, all with similar stories, all pattern evidence of Julian's behavior. Financial records showing that the bets were not just verbal agreements, but actual transactions, money changing hands based on the romantic manipulation of company employees. It was devastating. It was comprehensive. It was going straight to the board of directors. But Naomi wanted more than Julian's job. She wanted him to know that she had beaten him at his own game. She wanted him to understand, in that moment of maximum vulnerability, that everything he thought was real had been a performance, just like everything he had done to those other women. Naomi got dressed for dinner. She chose a red dress, his favorite color on her. She looked in the mirror. Showtime, she said. The restaurant was intimate, candlelit. Exactly the kind of place Julian would choose for a confession. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with a bouquet of roses and an expression of nervous anticipation. Naomi had never seen him nervous before. In all the months they had spent together, Julian had always been confident, smooth, in control. Now he looked like a man facing a firing squad. Good. You look beautiful, he said as she sat down. Thank you, Naomi replied. You said you had something to tell me? Julian took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. 3 months of planning. 3 months of performance. 3 months of watching him fall deeper and deeper while she compiled the evidence that would destroy him. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to sadness. I do, Julian said. And you're probably going to hate me, but I can't live with this secret anymore. He reached across the table and took her hands. His hands were trembling, actually trembling. When I first met you, he began, I wasn't interested in you as a person. I was interested in you as a challenge. There was a bet with some of the other $50,000 that I could make you fall in love with me. Naomi kept her face completely still. She had heard this exact speech in the recording she made 2 weeks ago. Julian practicing in front of the mirror, trying to find the right words. But hearing it in person was different. He looked genuinely terrified, genuinely ashamed. It was cruel and disgusting, and I'm ashamed of it, Julian continued. But somewhere along the way, something changed. I actually got to know you, and I realized that you're the most incredible person I've ever met. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. I called off the bet. 2 weeks ago, I told them I was out, because I couldn't stand the thought of hurting you, because I'm in love with you. He squeezed her hands. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know you might never want to see me again. But I had to tell you the truth. Because you deserve better than what I was planning to do. There was a long moment of silence. Naomi looked at him. She thought about the man she had met 3 months ago. The predator, the performer, the monster. She thought about the man sitting in front of her now. Broken open. Vulnerable. Real. Were they the same person? Did it matter? She thought about Sarah, crying in a bathroom stall. She thought about Victoria, rebuilding her life in Vermont. She thought about all the women who had been destroyed so that Julian and his friends could have a laugh. The answer was yes. It mattered. Because this man, whoever he had become, was still the man who had done those things. And becoming a better person didn't erase the damage. It didn't give Victoria back her career. It didn't give Sarah back her confidence. It didn't undo the humiliation that would follow those women for the rest of their lives. Redemption wasn't just about feeling sorry. It was about consequences. Naomi pulled her hands away from his. That's a very touching speech. Julian, she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Now let me play you something. She pressed play. Julian's own voice filled the restaurant. The target is the new marketing director. She's cold. Professional. Doesn't date anyone at the company. 50 grand says I can have her saying she loves me within 3 months. Julian's face went white. How did you? He started. Naomi stopped the recording. I was standing outside the door, she said calmly. That night at the executive dinner, I heard everything. Julian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. I've been playing you for 3 months, Julian. Every smile, every conversation, every intimate moment. I was never falling for you. I was gathering evidence. She set her phone on the table. I have recordings of every meeting you had with Derek and the others. I have testimony from Sarah, Victoria, and 3 other women you did this to. I have financial records of the bets. All of it is going to the board tomorrow morning. Julian looked like he might throw up. Naomi, please, he whispered. I was telling the truth. I did fall in love with you. I did call off the bet. I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing. Naomi's voice sharpened. The right thing would have been not making the bet in the first place. The right thing would have been treating women like human beings instead of trophies. You don't get credit for almost being decent. Say, estet. Your stepfather is going to have a choice tomorrow. Fire you and the others, or face a very public lawsuit from the women you've harassed over the years. I'm guessing he'll choose his company over his stepson. Julian grabbed her hand. Naomi, wait. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but please, can we just talk about this? I'll do anything. I'll pay off the victims. I'll go to therapy. I'll resign. Just please don't do this publicly. Naomi looked at his hand on hers. You asked those women to say they loved you in front of witnesses, she said quietly. So you could humiliate them publicly. Why should you get privacy you never gave them? She pulled her hand away. Goodbye, Julian. She walked out of the restaurant. She didn't look back. The board meeting the next morning was brutal. Naomi presented her evidence, calmly and professionally. The recordings, the testimony, the pattern of behavior stretching back years. Richard Archer listened with a face like stone. When she finished, he didn't look at Julian. He didn't look at Derek or the others who had been summoned to the meeting. He looked at Naomi. What do you want? Ask it. Justice, Naomi replied. I want Julian and everyone involved in these bets terminated immediately. I want financial settlements for every woman they targeted, and I want a complete overhaul of the company's harassment policies, with real consequences for violations. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then a nod at done. Julian shot to his feet. Richard, you can't be serious. I'm your son. I'm family. You're not my son, Richard said coldly. You're my wife's son, and right now, you're a liability this company cannot afford. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out. Julian turned to Naomi. There was something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred. Heartbreak. I really did love you, he said quietly. Naomi met his gaze. I know, she said, and for just a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered why they were here. That doesn't change anything, she added. Julian nodded slowly. I know, he said. Security appeared to escort him out. As he passed, Naomi, he paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I'm sorry, not because I got caught. Because I hurt people. Because I became someone I don't want to be. He looked at her. You deserved better than what I was planning, and so did all the others. I see that now. Naomi said nothing. Julian walked out. The door closed behind him. It was over. Or was it? The next few weeks were chaos. The board meeting happened the following morning. Naomi presented her evidence to 12 executives who sat in stunned silence. She started with the recording from the executive dinner, Julian's voice filling the conference room, talking about Naomi like she was a trophy to be won. Then she played the recordings from subsequent meetings. Derek and Julian and the others, discussing previous targets. Laughing about how Sarah had cried, making crude jokes about Victoria's body. Then she presented the testimony. 5 women, all telling the same story, all describing the same pattern of manipulation and public humiliation. Then she showed the financial records, screenshots of Venmo transactions, bank records showing money changing hands after each successful bet. And finally, she showed the HR complaints that had been buried, the performance reviews that had mysteriously turned negative right after women rejected Julian's advances, the pattern of retaliation that had protected him for years. When she finished, the room was silent. Richard Archer looked like he had aged 10 years. Primera de no idea, he said quietly. With respect, Naomi replied. You didn't want to have any idea. Julian was protected because he was family. HR knew better than to push complaints against him. Everyone in this company understood that crossing your stepson meant ending their career. She looked around the table. This isn't just about Julian. It's about a culture that allowed this to happen. A culture that valued protecting the powerful over protecting the vulnerable. She set down her files. I'm not asking you to fix this because it's the right thing to do. I'm asking you to fix this because if you don't, I will take this evidence to the press, to the EOC, and to a courtroom. And I promise you, the resulting scandal will cost this company far more than whatever settlement you're calculating in your heads right now. Richard nodded slowly. What do you want? He asked. Naomi told him. And to his credit, Richard didn't argue. Julian and everyone involved in these bets terminated immediately. He said, Yes. Financial settlements for every woman they targeted, yes. Complete overhaul of the company's harassment policies. Yes. And you want my resignation? Naomi considered this. No, she said. I want your commitment. Your real commitment, not a press release, to making this company safe for everyone who works here. I want you to be accountable for the culture you created. She looked at him. You're not a bad man, Mr. Archer. You just stopped paying attention. Start paying attention again. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, done. He stood up. Julian. Get in here. Julian had been waiting outside the conference room. He walked in, looking like a man walking to his execution. What he saw on the faces of the board members confirmed his worst fears. You're terminated, Reacher said. Effective immediately. Security will escort you to clean out your desk. Julian turned to Naomi. There was something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred. Heartbreak. Julian, Derek, and 3 other executives were terminated. All 5 were named in a civil lawsuit filed by the women they had targeted. The settlements were substantial. Sarah from accounting used her settlement to start a nonprofit helping workplace harassment survivors. Victoria from legal went back to school and became a therapist specializing in trauma recovery. Richard Archer, embarrassed by the scandal, but relieved it hadn't gone public, implemented every policy change Naomi had demanded. The company became, somewhat ironically, an industry leader in workplace safety. Naomi was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer. The board saw her as the one who had cleaned house, who had stood up for what was right, who had protected the company from an even bigger scandal. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt complicated. The first few months after Julian's termination were a whirlwind. Press to manage. Policies to implement. A team to rebuild now that 5 senior executives were gone. Naomi threw herself into the work. She was good at it. She always had been. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she found her thoughts drifting to places she didn't want them to go. She kept thinking about Julian's face in that restaurant. The devastation when she played the recording. The sincerity when he said he loved her. Had he been lying? He had lied about everything else. But something felt different about that moment. She told herself it didn't matter. Julian Cross was a manipulator. He had targeted women for sport. Any feelings he claimed to have were probably just another performance. Probably. But she couldn't shake the memory of his hands trembling. The tears in his eyes. The way his voice had cracked when he apologized. She had spent 3 months studying this man. Learning his tells. Identifying when he was performing and when he was genuine. And in that final moment, he had been genuine. She was sure of it, which meant she had destroyed someone who had actually, finally, begun to change. Was that justice? Or was it cruelty? She didn't know. She started therapy, not because she was broken, but because she needed to process what she had done, what she had felt, what she couldn't seem to let go of. Her therapist was a patient woman named Dr. Reeves, who specialized in trauma and complicated emotions. "You feel guilty," Dr. Reeves observed during their 3rd session. "I shouldn't," Naomi replied. He was planning to humiliate me. He had done it to other women. He deserved what happened. "Both things can be true," Dr. Reeves said. He deserved consequences, and you can still feel conflicted about how those consequences played out. Naomi considered this. "I think I started to care about him," she admitted. "Somewhere along the way, I wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be a performance, but he started telling me real things about his life, his childhood, his fears, things I don't think he had ever told anyone, and those real things affected you." "Yes. They made me see him as a person, not just a target." Dr. Reeves nodded. "That's not a weakness." "Naomi, that's empathy. You're allowed to feel empathy for someone even if they've done terrible things. But doesn't that make me a hypocrite? I destroyed him. While feeling sorry for him. It makes you human," Dr. Reeves replied. "Simple revenge is easy. What you did was complicated. You held him accountable while still recognizing his humanity. That's not hypocrisy. That's maturity." Naomi thought about that for a long time. Maybe Dr. Reeves was right. Or maybe she was just looking for an excuse to forgive herself. Either way, she had to find a way to move forward. 6 months later, Naomi received a letter. It was handwritten. The return address was a small town in Maine she had never heard of. "Dear Naomi," the letter read. "I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care. But I wanted you to know what happened after I left. I moved away from the city. I couldn't stay there. Too many reminders of who I used to be. I got a job at a local hardware store. Minimum wage. No one knows who I am here. No one cares. I started therapy. Real therapy. The kind where you actually have to face the things you've done. It's brutal. Some days I want to quit. But I keep going because I know I need to change. I've written letters to Sarah, Victoria, and the others, apologizing. Trying to explain, I don't know if any of them will read them. I don't blame them if they don't. I think about you every day, not in a romantic way. I know that's over, but I think about what you showed me, that actions have consequences, that the people I treated like objects were real human beings with real feelings. I hate who I was. I'm trying to become someone different. I don't know if it's possible, but I'm trying. Thank you for destroying me, Naomi. I know that sounds strange, but you broke me into pieces, and now I have a chance to put myself back together in a new way. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Julian Naomi read the letter 3 times. Then she put it in a drawer and went back to work. She didn't respond, but she didn't throw it away either. 1 year later, Naomi was at a conference in Seattle when she saw him. Julian was sitting alone at a coffee shop across from the convention center. He had a book open in front of him. He looked different. Thinner. Quieter. The arrogance that had defined him was gone. She almost walked past. Instead, she found herself crossing the street. She didn't know why. It wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It was just something she needed to do. She sat down across from him. Julian looked up. His eyes widened. Naomi. Julian. They stared at each other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the coffee shop faded into background static. The rest of the world seemed to disappear. Naomi studied his face. He looked older. Not dramatically, but in small ways. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A tiredness that seemed to go deeper than sleep deprivation. But there was something else too. Something lighter, as if a weight had been lifted that he had been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "What are you doing in Seattle?" he asked, finally. "Conference," she said. "Marketing, leadership, summit." "You?" "I live here now," Julian replied. "Moved about 6 months ago. Got a job with a nonprofit that helps at-risk youth. Turns out my experience with messed up childhoods is actually useful for something." He gave a small self-deprecating smile. Who would have thought? Naomi studied him. He looked genuinely different. Not performing, not trying to charm her, who's existing. She had spent 3 months reading this man, learning every micro-expression, identifying every tell. Right now, he wasn't performing. She was sure of it. "Tell me about it." She heard herself say the nonprofit. Julian seemed surprised by the question. "It's called Second Chances." He sighed slowly. "We work with teenagers who are heading down bad paths. Drug use, criminal activity. The kind of kids that society has basically given up on." He leaned forward slightly, and Naomi saw a spark of passion in his eyes that she had never seen when he talked about business. "Most programs try to fix these kids by punishing them. Stricter rules. More consequences. But that doesn't work. They've been punished their whole lives. What they need is someone who actually sees them, who listens to their story, who helps them understand why they make the choices they make. Es mile. I'm good at that part. The listening, getting people to open up. Because you spent years doing it for the wrong reasons," Naomi said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation." Julian nodded. "Yes. Exactly. I learned how to make people trust me, how to make them feel safe, how to get past their defenses." He looked down. "I used to use that skill to hurt people. Now I use it to help them." He looked up at her. "It doesn't erase what I did. Nothing can erase that. But maybe it balances the scales a little. Maybe by the time I die, I'll have helped more people than I hurt." Naomi felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not love, but something. Respect, maybe. For someone who had looked at their own destruction and used it as raw material for rebuilding. "I got your letter," she said. "I figured you probably threw it away." "I didn't." Julian nodded slowly. "How are you?" he asked. "Are you happy?" Naomi considered the question. She thought about her career, the promotions, the accolades, the corner office with the view. She thought about her personal life, the dates that went nowhere, the relationships she had been too busy or too guarded to pursue. She thought about the satisfaction she felt when she looked at the changes she had made at Archer Industries, the culture shift, the policies, the women who now felt safe to come forward. "I'm successful," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Julian agreed. "It isn't." They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop hummed around them. People ordering lattes, keyboards clicking. A child laughing at a nearby table. Normal life. Going on as if this conversation wasn't happening. "I'm not going to apologize again," Julian said. "I think I've said everything I can say, but I want you to know that what happened between us changed me. Not in a romantic way. You were right to destroy what I was. But in a real way, I'm not the person I was a year ago. Naomi looked at him. She thought about the man who had bet $50,000 on her heart. She thought about the man who had called off the bet because he couldn't stand to hurt her. She thought about the man sitting in front of her now, working minimum wage at a nonprofit, trying to help kids who reminded him of himself. People don't change, she said quietly. Julian shook his head. People don't change easily, he corrected. But we can change if we're willing to do the work. If something forces us to see ourselves clearly. He looked at her. You forced me to see myself clearly. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And also the best. Naomi stood up. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel. So she said the only thing that felt true. Good luck, Julian. She meant it. Thank you, Julian replied. She walked away. She didn't look back. But as she crossed the street, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness was too simple a word, but something like peace. She had set out to destroy Julian Cross, but in destroying him, she had created space for someone new to emerge. That wasn't redemption. Not exactly. But it was something. Final. Epilogue. 3 years later, Naomi stood on a stage at a women's leadership conference. 2,000 seats, all of them filled. Cameras in the back, streaming to thousands more online. The topic was workplace harassment and how to fight back. She had told this story before, in private conversations, in board meetings, in training sessions for HR professionals, but never like this. Never to this many people. She looked out at the audience and took a deep breath. 3 years ago, she began. I overheard a group of men betting $50,000 on whether one of them could make me fall in love. The audience shifted. Some gasped. Some nodded grimly, recognizing something familiar in the story. The man making the bet was handsome, charming, and protected by the most powerful person in our company. He had done this before. 2 other women. And he had never faced any consequences. She paused. When I heard that conversation, I had a choice. I could report it through official channels and watch nothing happen. Like nothing had happened for all the women before me. I could quit and walk away, protecting myself but leaving the next target unprotected. She looked out at the faces in the audience. Or I could fight back. She told the story. Not all of it, but enough. The recordings, the coalition, the evidence, the takedown. When she got to the end, the part about the board meeting and the terminations, the audience applauded. But Naomi held up her hand. That's not the end of the story, she said. The applause faded. After I destroyed this man's career, she continued, something unexpected happened. He changed. The audience was silent now. Confused. Mobe. Hawaii. He started therapy. He got a job helping at-risk youth. He wrote letters to every woman he had hurt, apologizing without making excuses. She paused. I saw him a year later. He wasn't performing anymore. The mask was gone. He had become a genuinely different person. She looked out at the audience, and I didn't know how to feel about that. She stepped away from the podium. We tell stories about revenge because they're satisfying, she said. The bad guy does something terrible. The good guy fights back. The bad guy gets what they deserve. Justice is served. The end. She shook her head. But real life is messier than that. Sometimes the bad guy changes. Sometimes the revenge doesn't feel as good as you thought it would. Sometimes you find yourself feeling something almost like sympathy for the person you destroyed. She looked at the young woman who had asked about Julian. What happened to him? She asked. He's doing better. Not because I forgave him. I didn't. But because he did the work to change. She returned to the podium. That's the thing about revenge, she said. It's satisfying in the moment, but it's not the end of the story. What happens after matters too. She paused. I set out to destroy a man who treated women like trophies. I succeeded, but what I didn't expect was that in destroying who he was, I made room for who he could become. She looked out at the audience. That doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't make it okay, but it does mean that people are more complicated than the worst thing they've ever done. She smiled. Even the people who hurt us, the audience was silent for a moment. Then they stood, 2,000 people, rising to their feet, applauding not just for the revenge, but for the complexity. For the honesty, for the acknowledgement that justice and mercy could coexist. Naomi watched them stand, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something close to peace. Not because she had won, but because she had learned something true. About revenge. About redemption. About the strange, complicated work of becoming a better person. And that truth was worth sharing. And that's the story of a woman who overheard a bet that could have destroyed her, and decided to destroy the man who made it instead. But here's the thing about this story. It's not really about revenge. It's about what happens when someone sees us clearly. Not the mask we wear. Not the performance we give. The real us, underneath all the lies. Julian bet $50,000 that he could make Naomi fall in love. What he didn't understand was that in order to win that bet, he would have to actually get to know her. And in getting to know her, he would have to let her get to know him. That was his downfall. Not the recordings. Not the testimony. The fact that he finally met someone who saw through him, and that's what changed him. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you overheard someone betting on your heart? Would you have walked away, confronted them, or done what Naomi did? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story surprised you, if it went somewhere you didn't expect, smash that like button. It really does help the channel grow more than you know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.